Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar from EPDs to DPPs, the future of sustainable aviation. We are thrilled to see such a strong turnout from across different industries who are interested in this crucial topic of aviation sustainability and transparency. My name is Trishna, and I'm the Senior Growth Marketer at Circularise, and I'll be your host and moderator for this session. So, my job is to make sure everything's running on time. And this webinar is a joint effort from Circularise, the Green Cabin Alliance, and Sekisui KYDEX. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin and agenda. Uh, we'll quickly cover what you can expect. So first, the agenda is we'll begin with a 15-minute presentation, maybe even shorter, to give you a crash course on what EPDs, that is Environmental Product Declarations, and DPPs, which is Digital Product Passports, are, and why they matter, led by Daniel Gregory from Circularise. Daniel is a research manager at Circularise and who will help us understand the digital systems and standards that make EPDs and DPPs possible. And he does so much more though. And then we'll move into a 40-minute expert panel discussion where Daniel will be joined by Ben Smalley from Sekisui, Elena Coppola from Green Cabin Alliance, and Laura Corrido from Circularise, to explore what this transition means specifically for aircraft interiors. And then we'll wrap up with a 10-minute live Q&A at the end. Some of the housekeeping notes that I mentioned, please, we encourage everybody to ask as many questions as you can. We have a really good expert panel here. So any doubts you have, they'll be happy to answer it for you. Throughout the event, just keep asking questions and we can address them towards the end. There's a questions tab at the bottom right corner. So if you could just add all your questions in there, it'll be great. And for those, if you're worried about taking notes, don't be. We're recording this session and we will be sharing this along with the webinar slides after the webinar is over. And we've also got some poll questions peppered in throughout the presentation that will help us stay engaged with you and get to know more about you. So, yes, so like I mentioned today, our topic is about aviation industry undergoing a significant and essential shift to sustainability, transparency, and safety. This transformation is being enabled by new tools, digital product passports, environmental product declarations, and our goal today is to help you understand the gap between EPDs and DPPs, why DPPs are necessary, and how the industry is preparing for these changes. In short, we want you to leave with an understanding of the strategic difference between the two and have a clear, actionable plan to begin your own implementation journey if it's applicable to you. Yeah. So then before we begin, I want to ask, see, EPDs are a logical starting point for many, but where is your organization on this journey? To get a sense of our audience, I'm going to launch our first poll, which is, hang on. Yes. So the objective of this poll is to gauge your current stage of adoption and to understand, as this provides a crucial baseline for our entire discussion. I'm just going to wait for a few seconds. Thank you. You can keep voting. I'll just now. Thank you for your responses. I'm going to now hand this over to Daniel and to kick us off with the presentation. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Fantastic. Thank you, Trishna. I appreciate the kind introduction. So yeah, my name is Daniel. I am a material science expert with the Circularise staff working on a lot of the difficult questions around what kind of data and how do you manage the data that goes into a digital product passport. Let's look at what that is in the context of the aviation industry and how that compares to the concept of the environmental product declaration. We'll start with the environmental product declaration. Many of you may be familiar with this. The purpose of the EPD is to provide a clear way to compare different environmental impacts of products. So we typically, when you're creating your life cycle, or you would run a life cycle assessment or an LCA that calculates the environmental impact data for, or calculates the environmental impact for a product over its full life cycle. This includes the greenhouse gas emissions, the resource use, like land use, different things like that. And it often involves a lot of, there's a lot of different methods that can go into that, and there are a lot of different assumptions you can make and a lot of sensitive IP that can be involved in that lifecycle assessment process. The EPD is a way to standardize that process so that you can more accurately compare different products in the same category, and it creates a framework and a report that not only is easily comparable, but also prevents the exposure of a lot of that IP. It kind of wraps up all of those numbers nicely so that you're not releasing sensitive information, you're releasing information others can use easily. This has the strength of being very credible, it's well known, and it's very widely used in a number of different industries, not just in aviation, but in many others. However, it does have some limitations, notably it's a snapshot. It is a particular how that product is produced and the environmental impact for the product at that date. And it is not really dynamic. It's insufficient for meeting some of the upcoming regulations, and it's very narrow in its scope. It's only environmental data. It doesn't have additional data associated with it. The DPP, or the Digital Product Passport, is one method of trying to, or is essentially a method of recording everything that is in a product, and it's a record of that product's life and movement from its creation to material transformations as it becomes a material into a component into a product, and then how that can be managed at the end of life. It's much more comprehensive, and that allows it can take on a regulatory compliance role, so you can prove that you meet different compliances or different regulatory compliance. It tracks end of life for circularity purposes. It can do trade customs declarations, and it allows you to verify the provenance of the material and the component. It can also hold the environmental data. The main limitation of the Digital Product Passport is that it is still under development. It's a little bit unclear what exactly that DPP is, where there are a lot of groups figuring that out at the moment, and it's very dependent on a lot of cross-industry collaboration, because especially if you go back to a materials point, the composite materials or aluminum that are not exclusively used by the aviation industry, there's a lot of different industries that use those kinds of materials, and the DPP needs to work across all of those different industries, and that can be quite a challenge sometimes. So if we look at those together, if you remember from a couple slides ago, we had the EPD displayed as a lovely book, but the book itself is not enough on the passport or on the product. What we want to have, I also notice in the chat someone can't hear anything. I don't know if anyone else is having that issue, but I'm happy to continue in the meantime. Essentially the DPP or the Digital Product Passport is kind of like a bookshelf within which you can put the EPD as a book. It covers a lot of different things. It has a much more expanded scope, and it's becoming increasingly required from a regulatory perspective, but also for additional purposes, it has additional benefits to the business itself, not just as a method of regulatory compliance. In terms of giving a rough comparison, here's kind of a little overview of that. You can see that the EPD is much more, or the environmental product declaration is a lot more static, but it does have a lot more current use because it's very established. It has these established standards, so it becomes very easy for businesses to work within that and compare each other. But it's really only business to business. It's not a wide. It doesn't encompass a wider group of stakeholders like the end-of-life recyclers or even users if you want to bring them into it. And it's not a living or evolving document like the DPP. Now, there are a number of benefits if you bring in this DPP for the aviation industry. I'll go through them and then we'll have Trishna bring up a second poll question. The most important, or some of the important ones here, the benefits are that by having your data in one place, you have the chance to automate that regulatory compliance that you might need. And it allows you to manage the product lifecycle much easier because you have the data in one space. If you're using different electronic ledgers that can verify the authenticity of parts, you can prevent counterfeits getting into your supply, which is very useful for preventing, not compromising on the safety of the aircraft that you're making in different flight, or compromising that flight safety. At the product's end of life, you can also track different components. You can make sure that you are proving that you have circularity in your supply chain by making the kinds of decisions that you need on how and where to recycle different components. And if you extend this to fuels, you can use this as a method of documenting and certifying sustainable aviation fuels by proving that you have a certain carbon footprint alleviated. So I'll let Trisha bring up the poll here. The idea is we want to know, or it would be good to know, what the most valuable benefit of the digital product passport is for your role in your industry. Is ideally one of the four things here. If there are other roles that are good or you can't quite pick between the two of them, please feel free to leave a message in the chat. I'd be happy to. I think that's very valuable to see the range and breadth of ways that can help. I'll give everyone a little second to cover that, and we can move on to the next one. So it's not all. Here we'll look at the kind of carrots and sticks aspect of the digital product passports. So from the stick perspective, it's nice that you have all of these it's nice that you have all this data in one place, but it's also increasingly becoming a requirement for doing business in the EU. The ESPR, which is the Eco-Design and Sustainable Products Regulation, mandates and outlines the creation of this digital product passport. And that is coming into force for a number of different materials and over the next, say, 2 or 3 years. Many of these will be featuring in the kinds of environments that we see in aviation, particularly in indoor cabin environments. Even for sustainable aviation fuels, while there's a 2% mandate now, that rises up to 70% by 2050. So in 25 years, that's quite an incredible increase, and managing that is going to be difficult. It also leads to a number of different industry challenges, the DPP allows you to cover a lot of industry challenges at the moment that may be pain points in your business or in your businesses, most notably something like different fragmented supply chains and having to gather data from a number of different sources. It's time consuming, it's resource intensive. There's also a lot of cross-border work, being able to standardize or harmonize standards across different borders and different sectors can be quite difficult. And really, as mentioned earlier, that being able to balance the transparency of sharing this data with protecting the IP and sensitive information that allows you to run your business properly. So again, here we have another quick poll question. Just wanting to know what kinds of pain points you have in what hurdles you have in adopting DPPs. What kinds of pain points might there be, and I encourage you to have a think about whether or not how these pain points differ and meet, or how they compare to the kinds of industry challenges that you might be facing outside of or without using the DPP itself. I will move on, or yeah, take another quick step in the next direction, looking at moving from more of the carrots or moving from the sticks and the regulatory pain points into more of the carrots and the opportunities that there are here, because it's not just you don't have to think of this just as a compliance aspect. There are many reasons you would want to have a digital product passport and have that and be able to gather that information in. There's a lot of market leadership for early adopters. If you can demonstrate that you're doing this, you can have it's easier and lower cost to jump in early, show that you're already compliant than it can be to catch up after you already need to comply. And you can gain the additional benefits and stay ahead of different competitors. It also allows you to enable innovative business models, which we'll talk a little bit. We hopefully talk about a little bit later. So you can lease things, you can recycle materials and recoup the materials. You can share assets between different organizations and keep track of who is responsible for what aspect of the product. And you can improve traceability of strategic materials that you need to keep an eye on to de-risk your supply chains. So knowing where and how you can find that aluminium or the specialty composites that you need. So a lot of different benefits that you can find in this. So to kind of try and summarize all of this, we have essentially the EPD is the starting block for DPP. It's that first book in the bookshelf. The EPD allows you to have that familiar foundation upon which people know how to share and compare data. You can use the DPP as the conduit for the EPD, and that then brings in more data and more data that allows you to make better decisions on more things all at the same time. Within this, having industry collaboration, through alliances, like for example, the Green Cabin Alliance is a critical aspect of this. It allows you to have better data governance that ensures that you get trust, usability, and security across your global supply chains, and it keeps you prepared from a regulatory perspective. You can manage the compliance that you have for the ESPR, the CSRD, or the CBAM regulations, and many others all in one spot. And it increasingly becomes unavoidable to use the DPPs. It's important to use it. So with that, we'll have a good summary. From here, what you want to do is essentially show that future standard. You've got the DPP linking safety and sustainability and competitiveness. You're shifting. The idea here is to shift from a static solution or a static system of DPPs into a more dynamic and data-rich DPP system. So you've got better compliance, better risk management, with fewer resources, and really being able to demonstrate that market leadership. There's a number of different examples of that in other industries, like in automotive. You're seeing it increasingly in construction as well, where people are already shifting towards DPPs, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for the aviation industry to learn from the best practices of those other industries and really take a fairly large step forward here. So with that, I will I'd like to introduce the panel discussion.
Yes, thank you, Daniel, for that excellent overview of EPDs and DPPs. What I understand, that foundation now leads us to a central question for today. Why are these tools so critical, specifically for aircraft cabin interiors? While the industry has rightly focused on SAF and efficient engines, the cabin represents a unique and complex sustainability challenge. It's a multi-layered puzzle. of hundreds of materials and composites and textiles, all certified for safety, but notoriously difficult to trace, separate, and then recycle. So, this complexity is why cabins have lagged behind and why far too much interior materials still end up in landfills. So, the question is, what if we could change that, and how do we change that? This is no longer a rhetorical question or theoretical question. It's the next frontier for sustainable aviation, and it's being tackled right now by many. So, to help us guide through how best to tackle this and to get some of your opinions, we have a phenomenal panel here of experts who live and breathe this challenge every day. So, we have Elena Coppola. She's a founder of Green Cabin Alliance and who brings a holistic view from her groundbreaking research with airlines, OEMs, and suppliers on the specific challenges of cabin. Then we have Ben Smalley. He's the VP of Business Development at Sekisui KYDEX, who will share hands-on perspective of material manufacturer, creating sustainable solutions and navigating the demand for data. He's also worked with GCA, Green Cabin Alliance, and is a member. And we have Laura Corridor, who is our IT product manager at Circularise, and she's joining us with some crucial practical perspectives, having worked for aviation with aviation companies, and she'll be sharing real world experience from implementing these systems in aviation projects. A reminder, please keep your questions coming, and let's dive into the discussion. So the first segment is about the cabin conundrum. Why does aviation have unique challenges in the cabin interiors, and where do you see the strongest push for change? We can start with Elena. Your research at Green Cabin Alliance has shown that cabins are a major sustainability bottleneck. Can you describe the scale of the cabin conundrum, especially to those who think this is just about weight and fuel burn? And what did your advisory board from Airbus, Boeing, and airlines identify as the core issues?
Of course, Trishna. Thank you. Thank you for the question. And thank you for inviting me to the panel. So, of course, what's really, it is a complex problem. The cabin tends to be the area that is lagging behind in the whole aviation context. So if you recycle an aircraft, you can recycle about 75% of it. And the 25%, the 15% that's left is the cabin itself. So the whole of the cabin, the galleys and the seats, tend to be the bit that's left that goes into landfill, doesn't get harnessed, doesn't get repurposed. And of course, that's, there is, you already mentioned, there is a issue, or the reason for that is that those parts are very complex. There's 100+ materials that go into a premium seat. The materials tend to be bonded together. It's what we call the sandwich problem. Materials are bonded together, stacked to create, the safety, the flammability that's required. But of course, that then becomes the real challenge when you want to dismantle and take it apart. Most of those materials, you don't know what they are at the end of life. You can't separate them fully, and you can't trace them. That's really the problem we're having today. That's the number one problem. And the second problem is that the supply chain, the aviation supply chain is very complex and at very different stages of maturity in terms of sustainability. It's quite fragmented, it's quite siloed. And because of, preserving or mitigating risk, it tends to be very siloed in its approach to new problems like sustainability.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. Ben, from your seat as a major material supplier, what does this problem look like on the ground, and what happens to these materials at the end of life today?
Yeah, thanks, Trishna, and thank you again for having me on the call today. Just for those who aren't aware, Sekisui KYDEX, we are an American plastic supplier, right? So we certainly have an uphill battle when it comes to sustainability, but if we can do it, I think everybody can. One of the things that we see is we see all this material going out into seats, right? And then at end of life, it's not identifiable or even traceable to what it is, or as Elena said, it's not even, more importantly, designed to be disassembled. Things are really done in a vacuum just to get it out the door, and then nothing really thought about what happens to the seat or this component 10 years from now. So what we really found is, yes, while it is an end-of-life problem, it's not an end-of-life problem. It's a designing for end-of-life challenge. You can't just sit at the end and try to fix this. You have to work back upstream, and that's what we're really passionate about, is being a part of that from the early stages, so we really give ourselves a chance at end of life, or more importantly, second life.
That's true. So then, Daniel, this sounds like a massive problem for data, and it's unique to. Is this unique to aviation, or do you see similar challenges in other industries as well?
It's a problem that expands beyond just the aviation industry. I've seen a lot of parallels to this in particularly the construction industry. While there are a lot of also there are many complex value chains, you have a lack of data connectivity between them. You also have product life cycles lasting decades and not years. So there's the management of all of that data and how you track that through multiple ownership changes. And even the safety element of this, I've heard from different companies and people trying to manage the data for ostensibly for the sustainability purposes. While they can get a lot of excellent data on the sustainability from an environmental product declaration, if that is hard, like that can be easy to find, it's much harder to find the sustainability data on that, and it's critical to build a building that stays up. So if they need to prioritize using and finding one source of data, it's going to be the performance data and the safety data. It's not going to be the sustainability data. So gathering all of those together and making them easily displayable so that people can make a decision with all of the data available to them and not just one subset is another I think, pertinent parallel between the two kinds of industries.
That's true. If any of the other panelists want to chime in at any point of time and add to any points, you're more than welcome to. And and so then my question is to Laura now, that this cabin conundrum that Elena and Ben have described is exactly what you've been working to solve. And in your recent work in pioneering traceability projects for major airframer like Airbus, what was the single biggest pain point that they were trying to address, and how did you deal with the supply chain fragmentation?
Thanks, Trishna. So yeah, we have partnered with many airlines in Circularise to try to solve the landfill issue, right? Today, basically what we aim to solve is how can enough data prevent, so the specific data that you need prevent materials going to landfill, right? And in this case, basically what we want to solve is not only with the LCA data, but having enough information so that the airlines also can take some decisions, right? The issue that we see today is that airlines have a lot of power. They are in place where they hire the MROs and give them the contracts. So what to do exactly with those materials? Landfill up today was the easy way. Now it's no longer becoming an option. Is getting expensive. But you also need to know toxicity of those materials to know which is the best option. Can they be recycled? There's where the DPPs also come in. But also very interesting topic that come out when you put all of the players, because we always do these projects, and this is very relevant with all of the steps of the supply chain. This is why it's very interesting. So we can have all of the points of view. At the end of the day, time to dismantle, for example, came out as something very relevant, right? So if you have in a DPP, just in a glance, you know, this is also a balance with security, right? So for example, you have 200 seats to dismantle, where if the time to dismantle is too much, then it means a cost, then it might not be dismantled, right? All of these topics, these instructions, all of this that can come into the DPP all of this exchange of data is what we really see as interesting happening in our projects, right? And also there's the topic of the long time of the lifespan, sorry, of parts, which is also a challenge for the digital passports, right? There are parts that can be available up to 20 years in a plane. Then this cabin also switches ownership from manufacturers, right, like Sekisui, to airlines, then to MROs. Following all of this, it's only possible with the DPP, right? So
Yeah, that's true. It does provide the whole holistic information that you would require. And Daniel, I love your analogy during the presentation where you talked about how EPT is like a book and then DPP would be like a bookshelf. How do you balance the need for transparent EPD and DPP data with protecting proprietary or sensitive information?
Yeah. So in that idea, essentially, the EPD is a book. You have different chapters and words inside made out of the data and the processes that you used for the lifecycle assessment for the LCA. And the essentially you can like that is all stored in the EPD, which is one of the books on that bookshelf. The DPP, being that bookshelf, can hold many more books, which will have many other words and chapters inside that reflect other kinds of data. Often the words and chapters will be the same, reflecting the fact that you're using the same kinds of data to make different books, or different, you're using the same base kinds of data to report on, say, the lifecycle inventory, but also the also something like the performance characteristics or the regulatory environments or the customs declarations. Where transparency comes into that is sometimes maybe there's a book on the bookshelf that you want someone to read, and maybe one of them is your personal diary, and you don't want them to read that. And so you can use in this analogy to, or you can kind of find the points in your diary and the sensitive information that you don't want to share, and you can kind of selectively redact those out of other books in this system. So you can take out the sensitive information and make sure that you're sharing what is necessary for people downstream of you, the end-of-life recycling, for example, upstream into the design aspect of things, to make the decisions that they need to for sustainability purposes, for safety purposes. But then you are hiding and you're keeping your sensitive IP protected and confidential, so that you can, you're able to do, you're able to facilitate the conversation without exposing yourself to business risks.
Yeah, because protecting IP is this one of the most important points and hurdles that people are trying to get over. Even here, we have like around 17% of the audience who chose protecting intellectual property and data security as their single biggest hurdle. So it's very important to make sure that these challenges are addressed when working with these tools like DPPs and EPDs. So Ben, in your company is working with EPDs. So from a manufacturer's perspective, what's the value of an EPD, and why is it the logical first step?
Yeah, and for us, it has certainly been a sustainability journey through this whole process, and I think that's the best way for me to explain it is, so we spent the better part of 2 years getting our LCA ready, and I was like a kid on Christmas waiting for it, and I couldn't wait to tell everybody about our LCA, and then once we got it, it became this thing of like, we have it, but I can't show it to you or tell you any of the information on it. So it became this really big ordeal every time we wanted to have a conversation around sustainability. We'd have to have conference calls, talk about what we can share, what we can't share. So then once we kind of discovered the EPD, which we're still working on at the moment, finalizing, it became a little bit like a life raft in a storm for us. It's like, okay, now we have something that we can share as a baseline data that's not sharing our confidential information. So for us, it became almost like a Rosetta Stone, like a communication tool that we're able to use now. So we have kind of a makeshift one that we're using as we finalize ours. And I do think it's inevitable that we'll get to DPPs. We're just not there yet as an organization and as an industry ready to share that. But I equate it to almost like we're kind of in the CD stage. And 5 years from now, we're all going to be listening to MP3s and using a Spotify or whatever it is, right? Or Circularise. It's just not sustainable. And I think a good example is with everything that's gone on with these critical minerals in the last 6 to 8 months, right? I must have filled 20 of the same form out for the same OEMs just through all of these different sub OEMs. And it's just not sustainable long term as we all get into sustainability. So we're doing EPDs now, but I think DPPs are inevitable for us in the future.
Yeah, I agree. And now with modern tools and DPPs evolving all the time, you have certain features that would help you not have to recreate the same kind of form all the time. You have user access management, right? Where you can have the same information shared to some people, and like if you want to do, like an auditor has to have access to all the information, you can give them, and then customers some information. You can choose who gets how much information, right? And this really helps.
Well, and also if you're doing sustainability right, your data should be out of date almost about the time that you post it, right? Because the point of an LCA is to keep driving improvement. So imagine if you're sending it out individually, you run the risk of your data not being as good as it could be, which is a risk in itself.
And the more manual it is, the lesser you know, after a point of time, you're just going to start cutting corners because it's just too much of time, right? Elena, if EPD is like the beginning and the snapshot of what's the limitation, maybe if you have something to add to that, and maybe some
Well, I
more
think, thank you. So I suppose what's really important is you know, it is that the digital product passport will connect from design, you know, from the design of the cabin through to the end of life, and it's hopefully it's reuse in terms of those materials. But it also allows you to, you know, the bookcase scenario, you know, analogy helps you to also track those hundreds of different materials. So a cabin is not just one material. There's different materials that are being stacked together. And I think that's what's so important, is that you're not looking at it in isolation, but you can in a dynamic way see all the complexity. And I think what Laura also talked about was the, you know, the date of different materials. You know, legislation requirements for different materials will come in at different stages. So for example, textiles is coming up very soon in 2027. And, you know, a big part of the cabin seat covers are textiles. So how do you then separate that from the rest of the cabin? And the digital product passport will help you look at that and really pick up those materials and see how you know, where are your pain points? Where do you have to react first?
Yes, absolutely. It gives you a more it's a granular view on every single material that's
and a dynamic view. I think
Yeah.
that's that it is dynamic is so important.
Yes, of course. Laura, in the projects that you've led, how were the DPPs implemented, and what's the practical step of implementation look like? Like, is it as easy as we might think, or is it more difficult?
So we always try to break problems into smaller problems. You always need to start somewhere. And as everyone already commented, right, EPDs have this baseline specifically for semantics also, right? Something that is very important to have interoperability between all of the stakeholders of a value chain are the semantics, the vocabulary that we use across the chain to make sure that we're comparing the same units, the same terms, right? Apples to apples. So at the end, we always need to start with one of the most important use cases, I would say, in each of the companies. Normally, we ask for each of the participants to propose a product. You start with some specific data points, right? Like LCA could be a data point. This is why if all of the companies already count on an EPD, where that is shareable between the different companies, but also maybe the EPD contains as a document too much information. So we want to make it more granular and be able to only partially share things, which is also a benefit from the DPP. So at the end, all of the regulation, all of the standardization help us to be able to transfer all of this data. And at the end, in the scope of the cabin, what we aim is to have, the dream would be to have the LCA of the cabin defined by the LCA, the individual LCA of all of the parts, where you can just pick it just as different puzzles, right, of the big picture, where if you repair something and you put it back, then you have an update of the full cabin LCA, then you have the life cycle, then you have the impact, and that all together is the final puzzle, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and in the project, we always start with, as I said, several sets of data points, always reflecting to the most available legislation which is out, is the battery passport. So we always reflect on that example as an available one for data points. We try to build that into the cabin, always with the most impactful products and parts in the cabin. That would be the first step, right? So deciding the data points, trying to exchange, and also trying to standardize, align, and get into agreements of what is shareable, what is not shareable, and then the game starts.
Yeah, I would imagine the supplier data collection would be the first step and most important one, and then everything else will follow suit. And this moves on. Then now we can talk about something that's really important, which is the IP protection and the practical challenges that come with an RFP and the value that it provides. So my first question would be to Ben. As a major concern for manufacturers is IP, and isn't that from your perspective, how does the fear of specifically holding companies back from investing in these systems would enable better recycling? And beyond that, what just responding to customer requests was the internal business case that outweighs the fear, right? So what's your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, and the fear of sharing your secrets is a real fear, right? And I'd argue that this industry, aviation interiors, is one of the last few industries with true IP, right? If you go to the shows, everything is very closed off, very unique in that aspect. But I also think that it's a bit of a culture in this industry to like be very confidential. It's kind of the default in this industry. Sorry, I can't share that with you. And it's like, it's a seat cover. It's not that confidential, right? We do this a lot in this industry. So I do believe that there will have to be a culture change in our industry, and not using sustainability as necessarily a competitive advantage, but in terms of getting the industry there. If you work with any sort of sustainability consultant, they will guide you into a way to where you can share the relevant information without exposing your IP. And I think we often think there's more IP than there is. A lot of these components are all designed very similarly, with similar materials and similar people moving to manufacturers. So I ultimately feel that it's going to have to be a willingness to get on that bus first. And then once we get there, there are ways in which we can share that. And I think it makes the industry better as a whole if we all work together in that space.
You're absolutely right. It is first and foremost a mindset problem which needs to be solved. And Laura, in the traceability frameworks that you've implemented, how do you technically design the system to reassure manufacturers? Like, you've worked on products that help this. So do we have anything in place that can mitigate some of these fears?
Sure. So basically, on our side, what we can provide is technology to support confidentiality, procedures to safely authenticate, first to make sure that there are groups of distribution, that each company is in control of the data that they create in the system. So basically, each data that you put in the digital passport should have its own privacy settings so that you can have complete ownership on when and where it can be shared and with whom, right? So as you know, for example, looking at the batteries directive again, there are groups of distribution, right? You have authorities who have or should have total right, or auditors. Then you have other groups which are then afterwards the most advanced in access, which are repairs and recyclers, but should be always part of a recognized EU database yet to be built, right? But that they should be granted very specific access to very specific data. So not all data is shared, and we always test this so to reassure that the technology allows for that. And we also work with let's say partial data sharing. So for example, just to put an example, if the legislation says that you need to comply with a material being less than 1% available and your composition it's 0.5, you don't need to disclose 0.5. You can do a statement behind it. It can be audited that your real composition is 0.5, but you just need to state and give away the fact that it's below 1%. So allowing companies to comply with legislation but not fully displaying their IP of their compositions is very powerful, right? And you can work, then you need to work data point by data point, trying to see, because some data needs to be fully disclosed or it's not enough. Some others can be partially disclosed and it's a lot more than today is happening, right? Which is no disclosure at all, no availability to recyclers and repairs to know what they are handling, no traceability of how this was built, which is the complex composition, does it has hazardous materials, which one. So most of these things are lost at the end, right, with all of the mixtures of the materials and all of the changing ownership.
Yeah, that sounds right. Just mindful of the time, we have 10 minutes left, so we're just going to pick up the pace a little bit. And I don't see a lot of questions, so I encourage the audience to ask as many questions as you want. But considering there are only a few, we can actually spend some more time on the panel discussion. My next question is, Elena, to you about the RFPs. So there's this chicken and egg problem. Airlines don't know what to ask in RFPs. Like the suppliers are waiting to be asked, like, what information do you want from us? We're happy to give it to you, but ask the right questions. So how do we break the cycle? How do we know what the airline should start putting in the RFPs and whose job it should be? Any idea on that?
Yeah, well, definitely, in my view, and all the research that we've done, the discussions we've done as Green Cabin Alliance, it really does rest with the airline. The airline is definitely the body that needs to ask for very clear, specific outcomes in terms of sustainability. That's the way to drive change in across the whole supply chain. And if the airlines asks for traceability via EPDs and digital product passports, I think it will only be to their own benefit at the end of the day, because what we also find is that it's often the product teams within the airlines who write an RFP to buy a new cabin environment, a cabin interior, but they are also the same teams who decommission those cabin environments. So by adding that component of traceability into the RFP, they're only making their own lives easier down the line. So 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the line, when the cabin comes out, is disposed, you have that true traceability. So you're actually future-proofing your own business by putting it very clearly in the RFP at that first stage.
Absolutely.
So I hope there's some airlines on this call. I hope they will be listening. And we as Green Cabin Alliance will definitely be focusing some of our webinars very directly to the airlines to highlight this benefit for them.
Yeah, and we also have a few suppliers, so they can pass on the message.
Yes, yes, please. We will be backing you.
Yes, and then we have the ROI on this. So Dan, this does this sound expensive to you? And from an airline's perspective, if there's someone listening in, what's the business case for this? And how does the DPP help them beyond checking just a sustainability box? Like, I'm imagining risk mitigation would be one of them, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important not to diminish the value of being able to check the box. Where, like, I mean, that's a substantial benefit. It's not only for regulatory aspects and in a consistently shifting regulatory aspect, having your data in one spot where you can just kind of hold it up and check, does this still work versus the new regulation? Yes, that reduces a ton of resources, which again is time saved and is therefore money saved. You also have being able to put that, like having it in one spot and making it easily available and reducing the resources for ESG's reporting with investors is another critical aspect of that isn't fully regulatory, but is still extremely important to running your business. What you're also doing is, again, maybe a slightly less direct approach, similar to checking the box, is avoiding the cost of having to catch up, where you're not putting in massive investment to meet requirements as you need them, versus being able to de-risk that digital infrastructure before you're required to implement it. Like it's pertinent to put in the effort and not wait until, say, a month or 2 months before the regulation comes into play to figure out how to get all this data. I mean, you heard Ben waiting for 2 years for his sustainability Christmas. It's difficult to do these things in 2 months, so it's worth getting a start early and making sure that you're fully prepared. It's more valuable to do that. It saves you money. You also, I mean, there's those you mentioned the risk mitigation, and yeah, there's that saying, what gets measured gets managed, and the DPP is all of those measurements that you might need to manage all in one spot. It's nice and easy. You can trace that supply chain. You can see where the bottlenecks are, not only in your tier 1, but also their tier 1, your tier 2, your tier 3, your tier 4. And you can reach out and see how to diversify those. How can you change that aspect of it? That also then blends into the design aspect of things. Looking at that, how do you maybe take out, as Alina mentioned, the sandwich problem of all of these different materials bonded together by adhesives? How do you can identify what's that adhesive, how can I change it? Or how can I, understanding all of these different complexities, maybe I can take out a whole section of my supply chain by reducing the number of materials I'm using, redesigning my product based on the information I have in my supply chain. You're really kind of just cutting it out at the source. It's safer, it's more sustainable by design. That's a really good way to kind of see all of these benefits coming in immediately. And I'd say another final thing that's really useful is that this opens up some new business models. Again, looking at the parallels to construction, they do a lot. There are a lot of kind of interiors as a service or different shells of that building as it provided as a service instead of as a unique asset. As Alina mentioned, people coming in and filling the RFP to provide the cabin are the people who are removing it. So offering it as a service allows them to keep control of those materials. They can track them. They can more easily manage those things. That also then reduces the cost for the airline itself. You can swap out, if it's a service, it's much easier to swap out, say if you want to update your livery within the cabin, that's relatively simple. It's a service, it's not a full product, it's not that expensive. And you can, if you wanted to, you could get a little bit crazy. You could add in like verified authenticity of cabin parts, and that opens them to reuse for avid collectors. I mean, the airline industry has a huge following of very dedicated fan bases of different airlines and aviation companies. So there's a lot of different avenues here where you can recoup some of the costs of implementing this, and in fact, give yourself many avenues for substantial profit.
That's actually very ingenious, like having different business models and it also gives rise to a lot of new businesses as well, who can do this as like a mini offering. quick. We have 3 minutes left. So we have one more section where we talk about the future vision of airlines. So maybe we can just have a few of you just talk about from different aspects. One, maybe Ben from material aspects and business model aspects, what and a manufacturer's point of view, what would be the future change? And maybe Elena, you can talk about what does the circular aircraft cabin look like in like 10 years or so, and how do you see things changing in the next coming years? Maybe Ben, you can start.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable that we're going to continue to become more connected, right? Even seeing the last 3 years of how much more we're connected with our OEMs and sharing data, that's going to be inevitable through all the things we've discussed. I think there's also going to be an inherent responsibility from the material supplier, right? Airlines commit to net zero by 2050. They're not going to do that on their own. A lot of that's going to have to roll downhill, right? So the sooner you can come to grips with that's going to be all of our responsibility, I think that's going to be helpful. And I think there's going to be an inherent responsibility to have outlets for your materials, even if it's not fully circularity back into a product, but have, wherever you're sending it, have an area for those materials to be collected. I think you'll just see a natural evolution, and some of it driven by regulation, but some of it driven by just an expectation that you operate at this level.
Yeah. And I'm imagining when others get on board, it automatically create like a sense of competition as well. Like
And
everybody.
momentum, yeah, and keeping up
Yeah.
with everyone, I think
Yes.
it will happen.
And Elena, what about from, like the circular aircraft cabin perspective, just in general?
I think I'd like to use this as a call to action as well, into saying that the airlines did pledge. Most of them have pledged to reach net zero by 2050. That's not very far away. It's only 2 or 3 cabin generations away, depending on if it's a seat or a galley. And if you need to, if we want to, as a supply chain, help the airlines to reach their pledges, then we need to put it into the business case today. It needs to be a business strategy today to bring this traceability on board, because otherwise we're not going to reach these targets. 10 years in the aviation industry is a blink of an eye. So we do need to move today in order to meet these targets for 2050. And that will be my, and I think, the other problem, the other driver to this is that Laura already hinted at, is that there is an increased cost in landfill that is becoming greater than the opportunity of harnessing these materials. And that's a real opportunity. So, if you put the business case in today, we can maybe start capitalizing on some of this material in 10 years' time. And that will be really amazing.
Yeah, that's true. We have one question, since we're technically supposed to be in the question answer round. Do you see such solution in the agricultural sector? Daniel, do you have anything to say on that?
Yeah, I was in the middle of typing a response. So I think there are a couple parallels, again, in the lifetime of agricultural equipment that can be here, where having, like, you want your tractor, or for as an example, to stick around for a long time. You want it to be easily repairable. It's important to repair when you're in a rural community. You want to be able to do that yourself. And having access from a DPP, having that centralized spot where you can find an instruction manual or resources that can help you make that repair is critical. And also then, saves on the sustainability of flying someone out or having to go get the extra part and do all of that replacement or get a new tractor. It's important. Like, these are all really critical aspects. Looking at something like, I can see also maybe the idea of a what we're doing in the sustainable aviation fuel aspect, where you're giving certifications. If there was, say, sustainable fertilization aspects where you're using low carbon or no carbon fuels, where you're creating the ammonia with hydrogen, like you can create zero carbon fertilizers in the same way that you create zero carbon fuels, and maybe being able to track those. There's a couple is another way. There's a number of different options. You're welcome to find me on LinkedIn. We can brainstorm them out. In the interest of time, I think I'll leave it there. But.
Yes, we are out of time, unfortunately. We've tried to answer whichever question is there, but you are free to reach out to our panelists or me. and we can help you on your journey. So again, I want to thank you, Elena, Bill, Laura, and Daniel for being such expert panelists and for sharing your knowledge with our audience today. And I want to say just finally for everybody here who's attended the webinar, thank you again for joining us. And the next step is to continue this conversation, connect with our panelists on LinkedIn, download our resources, and we'll be sharing, most importantly, start talking to each other. Next steps is just attend all our possible. Elena mentioned that there might be other webinars coming in from Green Cabin Alliance. If it interests you, please do join in, and our future webinars as well. Again, I'd like to thank everybody for your questions, for attending, and this isn't the end. This is the beginning of the conversation, and I hope we've managed to get you guys thinking about all of this, and we encourage you to take your ideas back to your teams and start building a future for sustainable flight. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Circularise.
Thank you so much.